My father hid my ID and birth certificate 2 days before university registration, saying, "If you can't even keep track of your things, how will you survive college?" When I told him he'd always treated me as less because I'm a girl, he scoffed, "You'll fail, and you'll come crawling back." I walked out. That was a year ago. Yesterday, he sat in court as the judge read his guilty verdict. Father tried to ruin my dream of going to college because college is just for boys. Now, he's livid because I proved that I am better than him. I have always dreamed of going to college. I studied hard, got good grades, and even applied for scholarships. But my father has made it very clear he doesn't think girls need higher education. This mindset didn't appear out of nowhere. Growing up, there were countless situations where my dad treated me differently than my brothers simply because I'm a girl. When I was 10, I told him I wanted to be a doctor. He laughed and said, "Why waste time? You'll just get married and stay home. Better learn how to cook instead." My brother, who was 12 at the time, said he wanted to be an engineer. Dad bought him books and kits to practice building things. At 13, I came first in my class for the science fair. My dad said, "That's nice, but science isn't for girls. You should help your mother with chores." That same year, my younger brother got a participation ribbon for a school football game, and Dad took him out for ice cream to celebrate. When I was 15, I saved up for months to buy a used laptop for schoolwork. One day, I came home and found it missing. My dad said, "Your brother needed it more. You can share or just use your phone." I got scolded for being selfish when I asked for it back. By the time I was in my last year of high school, I knew I had to fight for my dream. I studied late at night because during the day, my dad would always give me extra chores while my brothers relaxed. He'd say things like, "Boys need their rest. You're just helping the family." When I mentioned I was looking at universities, he laughed again. "College is for boys. Girls just get distracted and waste money. You'll be better off learning to be a good wife." My mom stayed quiet. I applied for a competitive scholarship in secret, telling only my teacher. When I got the acceptance letter, I was overjoyed. The scholarship covered tuition, books, and housing. I thought my dad might finally be proud since it wouldn't cost him anything. When I told him, he looked annoyed, not happy. "What's the point? You think you're smarter than me? A girl alone in the city? You'll just cause trouble. Stay home." I reminded him it wouldn't cost him a cent and I had already worked so hard. He shook his head. "You're stubborn like your mother. You'll regret it." Over the next few weeks, he tried to wear me down. He forgot to give me important mail, including documents from the scholarship office. Make me run errands all day so I couldn't prepare. When I protested, he'd say, "You're being dramatic. You think you're too good for this family." One day, I overheard him on the phone with my aunt saying, "Don't worry. I'll talk some sense into her. No daughter of mine is going to live far away like some loose woman." The final straw. 2 days before the university's registration deadline, my dad hid my ID and birth certificate. When I confronted him, he smirked. "Can't even keep track of your things. How will you survive college? Maybe this is a sign you should stay home." I tore the house apart looking for them. My mom whispered that they were in his locked desk drawer, but she was too scared to give me the key. That night, I picked the lock while he was asleep and took them back. When he found out the next morning, he exploded. "You're ungrateful. Everything I've done for you, and you sneak around like a thief." I told him everything I'd held back for years. He treated me like less because I was a girl, how he celebrated my brothers for the smallest things but ignored my hard work. He scoffed. "You think a piece of paper will make you better than me? You'll fail, and then you'll come crawling back." I walked out that same day, documents in my bag, and went to stay with my best friend's family until I left for school. Last week, I moved into my dorm. The university even offered me a paid tutoring position because of my high entrance exam score. My first paycheck will go toward a new laptop, mine, that no one can take away. My brother texted to say Dad's been in a bad mood ever since I left. Aunt told me he's been telling people I ran away to shame the family. I don't care. I'm finally free, and every time I sit in a lecture hall, I know I proved him wrong. He said I'd regret it. The only regret I have is that I wasted so many years believing his words meant more than my own dreams. But yesterday, when I went to the student services office to submit some paperwork, the clerk glanced at her computer screen and frowned. Are you sure you're still enrolled?" she asked. My heart dropped. "Do you mean?" She turned the monitor slightly toward me. On the screen was a request, filed under my student account, to withdraw me from the university effective immediately. The clerk clicked a few more times and turned the screen fully toward me, pointing at the details section. The withdrawal request had been submitted at 3:47 a.m. from an IP address in Edison, New Jersey, and the contact email had been changed to my father's personal Gmail account. My hands started shaking as I stared at the timestamp and location, realizing he'd somehow gotten into my student portal while I was sleeping hundreds of miles away. The clerk, whose name tag said Dr. Morrison, immediately picked up her phone and called someone from IT security while typing rapidly on her keyboard. She explained that this looked like fraud, and they were placing an immediate hold on my account to prevent any further attempts. In minutes, 2 campus security officers arrived and started taking down all the information, while Dr. Morrison printed out screenshots of everything. They had me fill out a breach report and told me to change all my passwords immediately, which meant I practically ran back to my dorm room. My roommate found me frantically typing on my laptop, changing every single password I could think of, and enabling 2-factor authentication on everything. He brought me a cup of tea and sat quietly while I worked, probably sensing that something serious had happened. The betrayal felt worse than anything my father had done before because this time he tried to destroy my future from hundreds of miles away. My phone suddenly lit up with message after message from Dev, each one more frantic than the last. He was typing so fast there were typos everywhere, but the main message was clear. Dad knew the withdrawal had been blocked and was driving to Aunt Kamala's house right now. I tried calling my aunt immediately, but the line just rang and rang, going to voicemail every time I tried. Then Arjun texted from home with another piece of the puzzle that made my stomach drop. Found my old laptop in the garage, the one Dad had taken from me years ago, and discovered Dad had been trying to crack into it for weeks. Mom had known about it, but was too scared to send me any direct warning, though now I understood all her weird comments about being careful with technology. That evening, my aunt finally called back, her voice shaking so badly I could barely understand her at first. My father had shown up at our house, demanding she convince me to come home, screaming that she'd corrupted his daughter. When she refused and told him I was an adult making my own choices, he turned to her husband and claimed she'd been secretly funding my expenses behind his back. This caused a massive fight between my aunt and uncle, with my cousins crying in the background as my father stood there looking satisfied. I tried to focus on my chemistry homework in the library later, but every single notification on my phone made me jump and check the screen immediately. The students studied peacefully around me, completely unaware that my entire world was falling apart through a series of texts and emails. Dr. Morrison sent me an email around midnight with documentation showing 2 more withdrawal attempts that morning from different IP addresses. University IE department was now treating this as a cybercrime case and had already traced one attempt to a public library computer near my hometown. The next day, Nisha showed up at my dorm with containers of homemade food her mom had sent, along with some news that actually made me smile for the first time in days. My father had gone to their house trying to convince her parents that I was bringing shame to both our families, but Nisha's mom had literally pushed him out the door. She told him that any parent who doesn't support their daughter's education is the one bringing shame, not the daughter trying to better herself. But the worst was yet to come when I opened my email the next morning and saw a message from my scholarship committee. One had contacted them claiming I'd provided fraudulent information on my application, saying I'd lied about my grades and extracurricular activities. The email was signed, a concerned community member, but I recognized my father's writing style immediately, especially the way he capitalized random words for emphasis. The scholarship committee sent their response within 2 days, stating they found zero evidence supporting my father's claims. They attached a warning letter about legal consequences for false accusations against scholarship recipients, printed everything out, and walked straight to campus legal services, where a caseworker named Janet took my folder. She scanned each document while typing notes into her computer system. She gave me a case number and said they'd start a formal harassment file immediately. 2 weeks into the semester, my physics professor stopped me after class to praise my tutoring work with struggling students. He mentioned 3 freshmen had improved their test scores after working with me during study sessions. Each small win felt like pushing back against my father's attempts to ruin my education. My phone rang during lunch one day, and I saw it was my mom calling from an unknown number. There's something really telling about how this father keeps changing his tactics. First it's hiding documents, then hacking student accounts, now false reports to the scholarship committee. Each time she finds a way around his control, he just finds a new method to try. She was whispering, and I could hear grocery store sounds in the background. She said my father was planning something with my social security card. She'd heard him on the phone about loans. The call cut off before she could say more, but I heard the fear in her voice. 3 days later, I went to the campus financial aid office and asked about identity theft protection. The counselor helped me freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus online right there in her office. She showed me how to set up fraud alerts and gave me pamphlets about protecting my personal information. She added notes to my file, documenting everything we'd done that day for the records. During my next tutoring session, I helped a freshman named Jake work through calculus problems while my phone sat face down on the table. The screen kept lighting up with notifications, but I couldn't bring myself to check them. Jake asked if I was okay, and I just nodded, focusing on the equations in front of us. The normal college moment felt weird against everything else happening in my life. That evening, I finally checked my phone and saw Dev had posted on social media about daughters who forget family values for Western corruption. He wrote that education doesn't replace character and got dozens of likes from aunts, uncles, and family friends. People commented about respecting parents and staying true to culture without knowing the real story. Arjun sent me a private message saying Dad was making him transfer to my university next semester to watch me. He apologized and said he didn't want to be a spy, but Dad threatened to cut him off too. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. At the end of week 3, campus security called me to their office about a letter from a lawyer. The letter claimed I was mentally unstable, and my family requested the university perform a wellness check on me. The security officer shook his head and said they recognized this as harassment based on my existing file. He added the letter to my case and said they were building quite a collection of evidence. During chemistry lab the next day, my lab partner Sarah noticed I kept messing up measurements. Suggested we study together in the library after class since we had an exam coming up. I accepted, grateful to spend time with someone who didn't know about my family drama. We found a quiet study room and spread our notes across the table. Sarah explained reaction mechanisms while I took notes, feeling almost normal for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Dr. Morrison called me to her office for an urgent meeting. She had a thick folder on her desk with my name on it, containing 7 documented attempts by my father to interfere with my education. He said the university was considering filing for a restraining order against him, but needed my consent to move forward. I looked at the stack of papers, showing everything from the fake withdrawal request to the wellness check letter. My hands shook as I signed the consent form for the restraining order, while Dr. Morrison made copies of everything for my records. That night, about a month into the semester, I set up my laptop in my dorm room to video call Nisha's family during their dinner. Her mom had made my favorite curry, and they'd saved a spot at the table with an empty plate like I was really there. When Nisha's mom said education wasn't rebellion, but evolution, and that I was always welcome, I broke down crying for the first time in weeks. The next morning, my phone buzzed with texts from classmates sending me links to videos they'd recorded at the main gate. My father had shown up with Dev and 2 uncles, yelling at security guards who wouldn't let them pass without my permission. The videos showed him calling me ungrateful and saying I was bringing shame to our family name while students filmed everything on their phones. Within hours, the videos had spread across campus social media, and the student union president, a senior named Rohan, posted his own story about family pressure. He organized a meeting that afternoon where dozens of students shared similar experiences and offered resources for dealing with cultural conflicts. Walking across campus at dusk that same day, I watched other students casually calling their parents while I deleted my father's 13th voicemail without listening. I knew it would just be the same demands to come home wrapped in different threats about my future. 3 days later, campus police called me to their office and showed me security footage of a man taking pictures of me walking to class. The private investigator they caught admitted my father hired him to document my behavior and report back on who I spent time with. The officer said they'd add this to the restraining order file and increase patrols near my dorm. That weekend, I discovered I couldn't make calls anymore because my father had canceled my phone plan when I tried calling Nisha. The health center called me in to fill out emergency coverage forms since he'd also removed me from the family insurance. Spent hours in their office while they scrambled to get me covered through the university's emergency fund for students in crisis. Using the camp's Wi-Fi, I checked my email and found a money transfer notification from an account I didn't recognize. Kamala Auntie had secretly wired me $500 through her friend's account, risking her own marriage to help me. Her note said my grandmother would be proud since she couldn't read, but made sure Kamala could get an education. That evening, an unknown number called the dorm phone, And when I answered, Arjun's voice came through a burner phone. He told me Dad was monitoring his regular phone and planning to claim me as a dependent on his taxes to mess with my financial aid. Arjun had taken photos of all the documents Dad was preparing and would email them from a library computer. The next morning, I walked to the counseling center for my first therapy appointment, my stomach in knots about talking to a stranger. The therapist, a woman in her 50s, listened without judgment as I explained everything that had happened since leaving home. She helped me see that what my father was doing wasn't just strict parenting or cultural tradition, but actual abuse. She gave me worksheets about recognizing manipulation patterns and scheduled weekly sessions to help me process everything. 2 days later, the financial aid office called me in urgently, because they'd received a letter claiming I had hidden assets. The signature was clearly forged, but it triggered a mandatory review that would freeze my worksheet payments for at least 2 weeks. The financial aid officer apologized and said they had to follow protocol, even though the letter seemed suspicious. I walked back to my dorm feeling sick to my stomach, knowing my dad was trying to mess with my money now, too. The next morning, Dr. Morrison called me to her office, and I could see papers spread all over her desk. She pushed her glasses up and told me she'd been tracking all the weird stuff happening to my account. She contacted the university's legal clinic and found a lawyer who wanted to help me for free. Her name was Sarah Winters, and she dealt with parents trying to control their kids' education before. I met Sarah that afternoon in a small office near the law building. She was maybe 40 with short brown hair and looked really serious when she read through all my documents. She said my dad was using every trick she'd seen and some new ones too. She started making a file of everything, including the fake withdrawal request and the forged letter about hidden assets. While we were talking, her phone buzzed and she frowned at the screen. She asked if my dad might contact my old high school, and I said I didn't know why he would. 2 days later, I found out exactly why when my old guidance counselor, Ms. Smith, called me. She sounded really upset and said my dad had called the school claiming I'd faked my transcripts to get into college. He demanded they sent him copies of everything and started yelling when they said they couldn't without my permission. Ms. Smith said she'd reported him for harassment after he called 5 times in one day. The school's lawyer sent him a letter telling him to stop contacting them or they'd get a restraining order. I thanked her and hung up, feeling more tired than I'd ever been in my life. At night, I was studying in the library when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. My hands started shaking when I read it because it was from my mom using a phone I didn't know she had. The message said she was leaving my dad and staying with her sister. She said my courage to choose education had shown her she could be strong too. She said she was sorry for staying silent all those years. I stared at the screen for so long the words got blurry from my tears. I texted back asking if she was safe, and she said yes, but to keep this phone number secret. The next day, the campus Indian Association president found me after class. Word had gone around about my situation, and they wanted to help. They were organizing a fundraiser because they'd heard about the insurance problems and frozen worksite payments. Tried to say I didn't need charity, but she grabbed my hand and said this was what community meant. 3 days later, they'd raised $2,000 through dinner sales and donations. People I'd never met were handing me $20 bills and saying they believed in me. One older woman pulled me aside and whispered that her parents had tried the same thing 30 years ago. By the time midterms came around in week 8, I was running on 3 hours of sleep a night. I studied every free second because I couldn't let my grades slip and give my dad any ammunition. When I got my scores back, I'd gotten A's on everything, including the physics exam everyone said was impossible. Mom finally found her voice after watching her daughter fight the battle alone, proving sometimes the student really does become the teacher in ways nobody expects. My physics professor asked me to stay after class and offered me a paid research position in his lab. It would pay $15 an hour and look great on grad school applications. I accepted immediately, even though I had no idea when I'd find time to sleep. 3 days later, Nisha called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said police had shown up at her parents' house looking for my mom. My dad had filed a missing person report claiming she'd been kidnapped by feminist influences. Officers had rolled their eyes when they read the report, but they still had to investigate. My mom had to go to the police station and prove she'd left on her own. The whole neighborhood was talking about it, and my dad was telling everyone my mom had been brainwashed. Dev texted me that night from his own hidden phone saying Dad was going crazy at home. He was breaking things and screaming about losing control of his family. Then came the worst part because Dad was making Dev write a statement about my mental instability for some lawyer. Dev said he was scared to refuse because Dad had already hit him once for defending me, but he promised he wouldn't lie about me no matter what Dad did. I told him to stay safe and that I'd figure something out. Next morning, Nisha let me use her phone to call my mom. It was the first real conversation we'd had since I'd left home. She cried and apologized for all the years she stayed quiet while Dad treated me like I was worth less than my brothers. She told me she'd already met with a divorce lawyer and filed the papers. She said watching me fight for my education had given her the strength she needed for 20 years. Talked for an hour, and she promised she'd be there when I graduated, even if she had to fight Dad in court to do it. 2 days later, I got called to the Title IX office for a mandatory meeting. Someone had filed a complaint saying I was creating a hostile environment for male students. Complaint said I was spreading anti-men propaganda and making male students feel unsafe. The officer reading it could barely keep a straight face because it was so obviously fake. But she said they had to investigate every complaint and I'd need to attend a hearing next week. I spent 3 hours in that office going over the same questions again and again. By week 10, I was falling apart from the stress of everything. I stayed locked in my dorm room whenever I wasn't in class and jumped every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. My roommate Sarah noticed I stopped going to the dining hall and was living on protein bars and energy drinks. She tried to get me to eat real food, but I couldn't keep anything down. My hands shook all the time and I started pulling out my hair without realizing it. Sarah said she was worried about me, but I told her I was fine even though we both knew I was lying. The next morning, Attorney Winters called and said she'd filed for an emergency restraining order after seeing all the evidence we collected. He had screenshots of every fake withdrawal attempt, recordings of threats, and witness statements from university staff who'd seen my dad show up. The judge granted a temporary order that same afternoon, which meant my dad couldn't contact me or come near campus anymore. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in weeks when she read me the order over the phone. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a voice message from Arjun. When I played it, I heard my dad's voice in the background talking to someone about hiring a guy to plant drugs in my dorm. Arjun had been recording secretly from the other room and caught the whole conversation, including the part where my dad said he'd pay $5,000 to get me expelled. The message from Arjun just said he was done watching our dad destroy people. I forwarded everything to Attorney Winters, who added it to our case file. That same week, my research professor called me into her office and asked if I'd be interested in a paid summer position in her lab that came with free campus housing. She'd noticed my work was good despite everything going on and said she wanted to help me stay focused on my future. For the first time since this started, I had a real plan for surviving without any family money. But 2 days later, my university emails started flooding with messages from people in our community calling me shameful and saying I was destroying our family's reputation. Each email came from a different person, but they all said similar things about how daughters should respect their fathers. Attorney Winters said this was perfect evidence since my dad was clearly organizing it to get around the restraining order. I was sitting in the library trying to focus on homework when campus security called saying someone named Dev Patel was at the main gate asking for me. My hands went cold because Dev never went anywhere without permission. When I got to the gate, I saw my 17-year-old brother standing there with just a backpack and tears running down his face. I can't become him, he kept saying over and over. Security let us use their office, while Dev told me how Dad had started pushing him to help track me down and how he'd heard Dad planning worse things. Taken a bus using money he'd saved from tutoring and didn't want to go back. Attorney Winters met us at Student Legal Services the next morning, where we sat in a small conference room while she explained Dev's options as a minor. The university said they could give him temporary emergency housing in the guest dorms while we figured out the legal stuff. She started making calls to find out what we needed to do to keep him safe legally. 3 days later, campus police called saying 2 men were at the gate demanding to see Dev. When I got there, I saw my dad standing next to his brother, who was a lawyer, and yelling about parental rights. The campus officers stood firm and reminded them about the restraining order, while my dad's face turned red with rage. Dev had to give a statement to the officers about why he'd run away, and for the first time, he told adults outside our family about the emotional abuse at home. The next day, the South Asian Student Association president introduced me to a doctor who'd graduated 10 years ago and escaped a similar family situation. She offered to mentor me and even set up an emergency fund to help with expenses and she knew what it was like to be cut off. That evening, I helped Dev with his calculus homework in my dorm room while Sarah studied at her desk. It felt weird doing something so normal with my brother after years of our dad making us compete against each other for his approval. We worked through problem sets and ate microwave popcorn like regular siblings for once. 3 weeks passed, and things got worse for my dad in ways I never expected. My mom's divorce lawyer called me asking for copies of all my university paperwork because she wanted to show the judge how my dad tried to control everyone in the family. I sent her everything, including the fake withdrawal request, the security footage from campus, and all the emails from the registrar's office about his attempts to pull me out of school. The lawyer said this stuff was gold for proving something called coercive control, which I guess is when someone uses threats and tricks to control other people. Meanwhile, Arjun decided he was done being quiet about our family situation and posted all those recordings he'd been making of Dad's rants on Facebook with captions explaining what was really happening. Within hours, everyone in Edison was talking about it and sharing the posts. People who used to respect my dad at the temple were commenting things like they couldn't believe this was the same man they knew. The recordings were brutal because you could hear him screaming about how girls don't deserve education and threatening to drag me home by my hair. Our cousin texted me screenshots of the neighborhood WhatsApp group where people were calling him a monster and saying they felt bad for our family. That same week, Dev called me crying because kids at school were asking him if the recordings were real and he didn't know what to say. I told him to just tell the truth and that none of this was his fault. Later that night, the 3 of us had our first video call together without our parents knowing. Dev was in his room with the door locked, Arjun was at his apartment, and I was in my dorm study lounge. We talked for 2 hours about everything Dad had done over the years, and it was like we were finally seeing the full picture. Dev told us about times Dad hit him for defending me. Arjun shared how Dad threatened to cut him off financially if he helped me with college, and I told them about all the documents he'd hidden and destroyed. We made a pact to support each other no matter what happened with the divorce and custody stuff. The next morning, camp security called me to their office and showed me a stack of reports they filed about my dad showing up at different buildings looking for me. Title IX coordinator was there too, and she said they were officially banning him from all university property because of 17 documented harassment attempts, including trying to follow female students he thought were me. They took his photo from the security footage and said they distributed it to all campus police and security guards with instructions to arrest him on site if he showed up again. I felt safer knowing he couldn't just walk onto campus anymore, but also scared because this meant he was getting more desperate. A week later, I got my first real paycheck from the research position, and it was more money than I'd ever had in my bank account. 17 documented harassment attempts? That number feels oddly specific for campus security to track so precisely. Why would they wait until 17 incidents before taking action? Wouldn't 3 or 4 be enough to establish a pattern? I went straight to the bank and opened my own account without anyone else's name on it for the first time in my life. The teller helped me set up online banking and showed me how to use the app to check my balance. On the way back to campus, I stopped at the grocery store and bought whatever I wanted without having to ask permission or explain why I needed certain things. Got name brand cereal, the good shampoo, fresh fruit, and even some chocolate just because I could. Standing in that checkout line with my own debit card felt like the most normal thing, but also the biggest victory. Back at school, the counseling center asked if I'd be willing to be a peer counselor for other students dealing with family pressure about education. I said yes, and started meeting with 3 other girls who were going through similar stuff with their families. One girl's parents had threatened to arrange her marriage if she didn't drop out. Another's family kept showing up at her classes to embarrass her. And the third one's dad had drained her college savings account just like mine tried to do. I met every week, and I shared everything I'd learned about campus resources, legal options, and how to stay safe while standing up to controlling families. 2 more weeks went by, and then Arjun called with news that made my stomach drop. Dad's company had gotten so many complaints about his behavior from people who saw the Facebook posts that HR opened an investigation. Apparently, some of his coworkers had also reported him for making comments at work about how women shouldn't be in management positions and how his daughter was bringing shame to the family by going to college. His boss told him he was on administrative leave while they investigated, which meant he couldn't go to work, but they were still deciding if they'd fire him. Dad blamed me for ruining his career, even though all I did was go to school and defend myself. Next surprise came when Kamala Auntie showed up at my dorm with her daughter Myra, who was 16. She'd left her husband after he took Dad's side and said she was staying with her sister in Princeton now. We went to the dining hall together, and for the first time, I saw 3 generations of women from our family eating together without any men around to tell us what we could talk about or how we should act. Kamala Auntie told me she was proud of me for standing up to my dad and that she wished she'd been brave enough to do it years ago. Myra said watching me fight for my education inspired her to apply to colleges even though her dad said she should just get married after high school. I sat there for 3 hours sharing stories and making plans for Myra's future. The restraining order hearing finally came around 5 weeks after all this started. I showed up at the courthouse with 2 boxes of evidence, including printed emails, security reports, transcripts of voicemails, screenshots of texts, and a USB drive with all the recordings. My dad's lawyer kept trying to argue that he was just a concerned father trying to protect his daughter, but the judge wasn't buying it. She looked through every piece of evidence, while my dad sat there getting redder and angrier, and his lawyer tried to say the recordings were taken out of context. The judge asked him to explain what context would make it okay to threaten to drag your daughter home by her hair. The lawyer didn't have an answer for that. After 2 hours of testimony and evidence review, the judge said she'd seen enough. She granted a 2-year restraining order that required my dad to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my dorm, and the entire university campus. And she said something that made my dad's face go white because she was referring the case to the criminal prosecutor's office for possible stalking and harassment charges. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off and said the evidence clearly showed a pattern of criminal behavior that went beyond family disagreement. The bailiff moved toward my dad while his lawyer packed up his briefcase without making eye contact. Inside the courthouse, my mom grabbed my hand and squeezed it tight while my dad got into his brother's car and drove away. Over the next few weeks, things moved fast. My mom filed for emergency custody of Dev with help from the legal aid lawyer. The hearing happened quickly since the judge already knew about the restraining order and criminal charges. Dev moved in with my mom at Kamala Auntie's apartment the same day the court approved it. They set up a small room with his soccer posters and video games. 16 of the semester arrived, and I decorated my dorm room for Diwali. Dev took the train for medicine to help me hang the string lights around my window. We made rangly patterns with colored sand on paper since we couldn't do it on the dorm floor. My new friends from the International Student Club brought samosas and helped us light the dayas. Dev smiled more than I'd seen in months as we ate midai and watched the candles flicker. The festival felt different this year without the fear hanging over us. Meanwhile, my dad's brother called my mom to say he couldn't represent my dad anymore. He'd seen all the evidence, including the forged documents and recordings of threats. He told the family he couldn't defend what my dad had done and that my dad needed professional help, not legal tricks. The next day, a letter arrived from India addressed to me. My mom's old neighbor had written about my grandmother who died when I was 5. She wrote that my grandmother couldn't read but memorized entire books by listening to others read them aloud. She said I had the same spirit and shouldn't let anyone dim my light. I kept that letter in my desk drawer and read it whenever I felt doubt creeping in. Finals week came and I studied harder than ever before. My chemistry professor posted the grades and I'd gotten an A in every class. Dr. Morrison called me to her office to personally congratulate me on making the dean's list. Said she'd seen many students face challenges, but few handled them with such grace. That same week, my dad went to the bank to withdraw my college fund that he thought he still controlled. The bank manager told him the account had been moved months ago during the separation proceedings. My mom had quietly protected that money when she first filed for divorce. He left the bank empty-handed and angry according to the security footage my mom's lawyer obtained later. Winter break arrived and most students went home, but I stayed on campus. Got permission to keep working in the chemistry lab for extra credit. My professor mentioned that if I kept up this trajectory, she'd recommend me for PhD programs when the time came. She showed me research papers from her graduate students and explained what opportunities existed in pharmaceutical research. Arjun called me on New Year's Eve with big news. He'd applied to transfer to my university, but not for engineering like our dad wanted. He was switching to art, something he'd loved since childhood, but never dared pursue. The acceptance letter came through, and he'd start in the spring semester. We talked about finally supporting each other's real dreams instead of the ones forced on us. 3 weeks into the new semester, campus security called me. They caught my dad trying to access my records at the registrar's office, despite the restraining order. The police arrested him on the spot, and his mugshot appeared in the Edison newspaper the next morning. Several relatives called my mom, expressing shock, finally seeing what we'd been dealing with. During winter break, I started volunteering at a women's shelter near campus. I shared my story with women who were escaping their own controlling families. One woman cried when I explained how I'd gotten out and was now in college. The shelter coordinator asked if I'd speak at their fundraising event about the importance of education for abuse survivors. Spring semester brought the divorce proceedings my mom had started back in December, and during one meeting with her lawyer, she dropped a bombshell that made everything click into place. She pulled out old college transcripts from a folder she'd hidden for 20 years and showed them to the lawyer while I sat there stunned. My mom had been 3 semesters away from finishing her computer science degree when she married my dad, but he'd made her drop out the week after their wedding by calling the school and withdrawing her without her knowledge. knowledge. The lawyer took photos of everything, while my mom explained how my dad had used the exact same tactics on her that he'd tried on me, from hiding documents to making fake phone calls to the registrar's office. Weekend, I was going through old family photos at my mom's new apartment when I found a picture that didn't make sense, showing my dad with two sisters instead of just the one aunt I knew about. My mom saw me looking at it and finally told me the truth about Myra, my dad's younger sister, who'd run away to California to attend medical school when she was 19. The family had completely erased her existence after she left, removing her from photos and never mentioning her name again. But my mom had secretly kept this one picture and Myra's old contact information written on the back. I spent 3 days tracking her down through medical directories and LinkedIn until I found Dr. Mira Patel working as a surgeon at Cedars-Sinai and Los Angeles. When I sent her a message explaining who I was and what had happened with my dad, she responded within an hour asking if we could video call that evening. Her face appeared on my laptop screen looking exactly like an older version of my dad, but with kind eyes, and she told me she'd been watching my story unfold through distant relatives' social media posts. She said I was breaking the cycle she'd only cracked and offered to testify about their father's methods if needed for any legal proceedings. Dr. Mira Patel just entered the story like a boss-level character who already beat this game 20 years ago. Turns out Dad's been recycling the same playbook since forever, but his sister actually got the medical degree and the last laugh. 2 weeks later, the criminal trial for stalking and harassment charges began at the Edison courthouse, with my dad facing up to 3 years in jail as prosecutors laid out mountains of evidence. They had the fake withdrawal forms, the tracking app data, recordings of threatening voicemails, witness statements from campus security, and documentation of every single attempt he'd made to sabotage my education. The prosecutor showed the jury a timeline of his actions spanning 6 months, each incident marked with evidence tags and witness corroboration. My campus held an event about educational coercion in immigrant families during week 20 of the semester, and they asked me to be the keynote speaker. I stood in front of 200 students and faculty members sharing my story, explaining the warning signs and the resources available for students facing similar situations. The university used my case to establish new protocols, including emergency housing funds, legal advocacy services, and a verification system for any withdrawal requests. Dev called me that night from his new school, where my mom had enrolled him after moving out, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in years. He told me he was finally doing well in his classes without Dad constantly putting him down, and that I'd saved him from becoming like our father because he'd started believing those toxic words about women and education. The next morning, my dad's company sent him a termination letter citing the criminal charges and the negative publicity surrounding his case. His professional reputation as a respected engineer crumbled within days as news spread through the Indian community in Edison about what he'd done. Our extended family split right down the middle, with my progressive cousins and younger aunts supporting me, while the traditional uncles and older relatives sided with my dad. Family WhatsApp groups exploded with arguments about women's education and tradition, revealing tensions that had been hidden for decades under polite family gatherings. My research professor nominated me for a prestigious summer program at MIT, writing in her recommendation letter about my resilience and brilliance despite the obstacles I'd faced. The acceptance email arrived during finals week, offering me a fully funded position working on cutting-edge biomedical research with some of the top scientists in the field. 6 months into the legal proceedings, my dad took the stand claiming cultural tradition justified his actions to control my education. The prosecutor systematically destroyed this defense by bringing in testimony from successful Indian women, including my Aunt Myra, who joined via video link from California, each one explaining how education had transformed their lives despite family opposition. The judge took notes while my mom sat in the witness box, explaining how she'd been denied her own college dreams 20 years ago. 3 weeks later, the verdict came down, and my dad was found guilty on all counts, including stalking and criminal harassment. Courtroom was packed when the judge read out his sentence of 6 months in jail, plus mandatory counseling about coercive control. My mom had already filed for divorce 2 months earlier, and the judge granted her full custody of Dev, along with most of the assets, since the prosecutor showed proof of years of financial abuse. She enrolled at the community college near our apartment the same week the divorce papers got signed. I helped her pick classes, while Dev made flashcards for her first biology exam. That semester, I met a freshman girl named Priya who was hiding her acceptance letter from her parents. It reminded me of myself a year ago, so I spent hours with her in the library showing her how to apply for emergency housing and connect with student services. She cried when I helped her move into the dorms and said nobody had ever stood up for her before. My dad's sentencing hearing happened right before finals week. The judge added a 5-year restraining order that banned him from contacting any of us without court supervision. Before they took him to start his sentence, he got his mother to call me with one last message about how I destroyed our family. I texted back 3 words that I'd been holding in for years. The day after his sentencing, my mom got her first semester grades. We all screamed when we saw straight A's on her transcript. Dev baked a cake while Arjun drove down from his new job to celebrate with us, and Kamala joined by video from California. We started doing weekly video calls after that, where we'd share what we were learning without anyone telling us we weren't smart enough. Near the end of my first year, I got an email about my scholarship renewal. It approved me for another full year with extra funding for research, after Dr. Morrison wrote them a letter about my courage in pursuing education, despite extraordinary circumstances. The scholarship committee asked me to present at their annual review meeting about my research on women's educational access in immigrant communities. I stood at that podium looking at the same people who'd given me a chance when my own father tried to stop me. My hands weren't shaking anymore as I clicked through slides showing statistics about girls whose families blocked their education. Committee members leaned forward when I explained how one scholarship could transform an entire family's future. My research showed that when immigrant daughters get educated, they don't just change their own lives, but create ripple effects through their communities. After my presentation, the committee chair told me they were creating a new mentorship program based on my recommendations. 5 more girls like me would get scholarships next year with built-in support systems for family opposition cases. Walking back to my dorm, I passed the registrar's office where this whole legal mess had started. Dr. Morrison was still there working late, and she waved at me through the window. I waved back thinking about how different everything was from that terrifying day when she discovered my dad's fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from the freshman girl I'd been mentoring saying she just aced her first chemistry exam. Another message came from my mom asking for help with her essay on cell division. Dev sent a photo of his acceptance letter to a summer engineering program he'd applied to without telling anyone. Even Arjun texted about signing up for night classes to finish his degree. My dad had tried so hard to keep education away from us, but instead he created a whole family of students. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my dorm room surrounded by textbooks he'd said I'd never need. Tomorrow I had 3 finals and a lab report due, but tonight I was helping my mom understand photosynthesis over video chat while Dev explained calculus problems in the background. This was our new family tradition, and it was better than anything my dad's narrow world had offered. My scholarship would carry me through 4 years of university, and then hopefully to medical school like I dreamed when I was 10. The little girl who'd been told science wasn't for girls was gone, and in her place stood someone who knew that education wasn't just about books and grades. It was about freedom and choices, and proving that no amount of control could stop someone who refused to give up on their dreams. My story had started with a father who thought college was only for boys, but it was ending with an entire family discovering that learning belonged to anyone brave enough to reach for it. The research committee called me into their office 3 weeks later and handed me a folder with my name on it. Inside was a letter offering me extra funding for my quantum physics project, plus a guaranteed spot in their graduate program starting next year. My hands shook as I signed the acceptance papers, while the department head shook my hand and told me they'd never seen such dedication from a first-year student. Months after that, I stood backstage at the honors ceremony, watching my mom adjust her new student ID badge that she'd gotten after enrolling in community college classes. We walked across that same stage to get her certificate for completing her first semester with straight A's, and when our eyes met, we both started crying. Dev sent me a video the next week of him standing in front of his high school assembly, talking about how watching his sister fight for her education taught him that following tradition without thinking was just another way to stay stuck. The principal posted it on the school website, and within days, I got emails from cousins in India and aunts in California saying they were signing up for classes too. Arjun texted me photos from his art show downtown, where he'd hung a huge painting of me hunched over my phone, studying in the dark, while chaos swirled around me with a plaque that said, "Sisters Courage," underneath. The university hired me to work with their refugee support program, tutoring girls who faced the same kinds of barriers I did, and the coordinator asked me to help train other tutors by sharing my story. Kamala Auntie called to tell me she'd set up a fund using money from her retirement account to help young women escape educational control, and asked me to be the first board member to help decide who got scholarships. The 1-year anniversary of leaving home, I sat in my dorm room writing in my journal about how I thought I was just fighting for college, but really I was fighting for every girl who gets told her dreams don't matter as much. 3 months later, I stood at the podium at a national physics conference, presenting my research on quantum entanglement, while my mom sat in the front row next to Dev and Arjun and Nisha, and all the people who became my real family. Walking to my advanced physics class the next morning, I passed a tour group of prospective students, and noticed a young Indian girl standing next to her father, who kept interrupting the guide to say his daughter didn't need to know about the science buildings. Something feels convenient about how perfectly everyone's life transformed after Dad went to jail. Mom getting straight A's, Dev thriving, even Arjun suddenly pursuing art and education. The timing of all these success stories happening simultaneously makes me wonder if stress was really the only thing holding everyone back. I reached into my bag and pulled out a card for the Women's Education Support Network I'd started with some other students and pressed it into her hand while her dad was looking at his phone. "Your dreams matter," I whispered, and watched her eyes go wide before she quickly tucked the card into her pocket. I kept walking to class thinking about how my education had become something bigger than just my own success. It had become a bridge for others to cross when they were ready to fight for their own dreams too. Passing around secret study cards like they're part of some underground resistance? That's peak academic espionage, and I'm here for it. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.